newsletter. We really appreciate it when our members step up to take on some responsibilities for us. It's very special. We're thrilled to have Paul Freedman with us today. This meeting will be a little bit different. If you do have a question or a comment during Mr. Freedman's presentation, you may unmute yourself and ask that during as the presentation moves forward. And I'm going to turn this over to our Vice President, Judy Mazza, who has the pleasure of introducing Mr. Freedman and his topic. You're on, Judy.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So Pam, thank you very much. And Dr. Freedman, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Freedman, the Chester D. Tripp Professor of History at Yale. Dr. Freedman taught history at Vanderbilt University for 18 years and then moved to Yale in 1997 to continue teaching both undergraduates and graduates. And he's presented and published many books, articles, chapters, papers, and is multilingual. He's studied an extensive, as I did, what was the bridge between medieval studies and his culinary history interests. In 2008, he edited the book, Food, The History of Taste, which won an IACP award. And you can also see the connection with another book he published in 2008 called Out of the East, Spices and the Medieval Imagination. Well, living in a close-in suburb of New York City in Westchester, which is where I come from, made exploration of the New York City's public library's extensive menu collection readily available and led him to write the 2016 book called 10 Restaurants That Changed America. His most recent book, American Cuisine and How It Got This Way, explores how and why convenience, technology, and predictability took precedence over food taste in the recent past, at least until the 1970s, when a growing movement which emphasized seasonality, ingredients, and local produce and so forth sources developed. I, for one, am curious to know if he thinks this movement will continue, and I'm curious to also know how he thinks the pandemic, with the increase in home cooking and consumption of food at home, how that's going to influence American cuisine. So with that said, let me please turn this over to Dr. Freedman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you everybody for joining us today. As I said to some of the people who came in early, I'm aware that there's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. And so I'm grateful also to have an opportunity to think about food and to address this, this wonderful group. So the question that Judith raised, how do I get from medieval history to food? I mean, I can answer in more detail if there's interest at the end, but it does remind me of really the point of some of the research that I've done, which is to argue that food and food history is an academic subject, a worthwhile academic subject. And this battle should have been over a long time ago. You know, just a couple years ago at the Medieval Academy of America, and that's the sort of umbrella organization for people who study medieval history, literature, art, music, and so forth. It met at Notre Dame in 2019, and I gave a paper on 2 late medieval cookbooks from Catalonia. And a friend, or at least a quote friend and colleague in the audience, after my paper, asked me a question and then followed it up with this observation to all and sundry. Well, by the way, whatever happened to the Paul Freedman of the origins of peasant servitude in medieval Catalonia? You know, as in, you were a serious guy at one time, and now food. Jacques Pepin, as you are likely to know, graduated from Columbia University and wanted to study, get a PhD in French literature. And his tentative thesis topic was to do with food and French literature. And he was told, Monsieur Papin, that is not a serious topic. You can't do a dissertation on that. While food is obviously a serious topic with regard to environment, with regard to physiology, obviously you can't live without it, its cultural, symbolic importance and its historical importance still, unfortunately, is not universally accepted. So the book you see here, which came out in a little over a year ago, and no, I'm sorry, the way time goes by. Yes, that's right. Okay, and then the restaurants book from 2016 are oriented around really two questions. Is there such a thing as American cuisine? And if there is, what is it? So this book gives away the answer to number one. Yes, there is such a thing as American cuisine, but I'm interested in trying to figure out what it is. And the fact that that's a little bit of a mystery is because if you were to go into an Italian restaurant or into a restaurant that advertises itself as Italian, you would know what to expect. It's going to have pasta on the menu somewhere. An Indian restaurant, even if curry is not authentically Indian, in this country, an Indian restaurant is going to have some kind of array of dishes called. But an American restaurant could be anything. It could be New American, what Judith was describing, farm to table. It could be comfort food. It could be a kind of international assortment with both gazpachos and fajitas on the menu, along with maybe pot stickers and pad thai. So observers from other countries have taken the basic positions with regard to American cuisine. One, that it doesn't exist. Everything is borrowed from somewhere else. Two, that American cuisine is fast food. And three is a more favorable version of number one, that American food is eclectic, kind of appealingly internationally eclectic. Appealingly in the sense that this has spread to the rest of the world in the 21st century. And Patrick, if I could have the next slide. Here is like a chalkboard advertising a restaurant in Poitiers, France. Authentic French tacos, burger, panini. Ha ha ha. But this kind of global, all that's missing is sushi, right? This kind of global cuisine really until recently was not at all characteristic of Europe. And very much of the United States, as I'll say. It goes back to certainly the last couple decades of the 19th century. That is, Americans wanting to eat the food of other countries and not wanting to eat the same thing, twice, as in the common statement, oh, no, let's not go to a Thai restaurant. I had Thai food yesterday. That really makes no sense in the rest of the world until relatively recently. I'm going to concentrate on three things as part of my definition of American food. One is an inheritance of regional cooking. Second, an early and complete acceptance, at least for a time, of industrially produced and processed food. And the third is the love of variety. This pattern began to change around 1970 with the emergence of the farm to table movement. But its key constituents were, as I've said, regionalism, processed food, and variety. Let's maybe start with regionalism. One answer to the statement that there's no such thing as American cuisine is to say, well, there's no such thing as a single American cuisine, but there are many specialties, such as clam chowder in New England, or grits in the South, crayfish etouffee in New Orleans, or fish tacos in San Diego. All of this activity disguises the fact that actual folk traditions, for the most part, have died out. Boston used to be famous for baked beans, so much so that newscasters used to refer to the city as Bean Town, but this is forgotten. A specialty of the Chesapeake, including Washington, but more identified at the time with Baltimore, was terrapin. Again, I'm sure this is known to everybody in this audience. One of the most prestigious dishes in the 19th century, but surviving only in the mascot of the University of Maryland. I will say I have had terrapin once, and it was in Wilmington, Delaware, at the Wilmington Club, and it really was delicious, surprisingly delicate. I'll come back to terrapin. So there are also regional specialties that are faux. I mean, people think they're regional specialties or that they're old, but they're not.
What is the topic?
I'm not sure why there's this feedback. Are you hearing me all right?
Well, there's some feedback. If I could ask all the participants to mute themselves. I can't mute all or we would lose Paul. So if you see you click on the microphone icon near your, on your image, and that'll prevent, that'll prevent feedback into Paul's type. So.
Okay, great, thank you. So an example of faux regionalism is key lime pie. A book from 1972 called Famous Florida Recipes attributes key lime pie to what it calls pioneer settlers. But in fact, the first mention of key lime pie was in a national women's magazine just after World War II. And then it was a variation on a Borden's condensed milk recipe for magic lemon cream pie. Of course, there's some authentic survivals, Pennsylvania Dutch food. Louisiana has probably weathered the onslaught of homogenization and standardization everywhere else, both the Creole cuisine of New Orleans and the Cajun cuisine of the rest of the southern part of the state. The next slide shows a menu cover from a restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky, from about 1961. So the restaurant was in Louisville, but it served New Orleans food. And its advertising on this occasion, a New England clam bake. And if you open the menu, this clam bake includes gumbo. So regional food in America is both kind of endangered or extinct in many places, and also is the victim of this kind of eclecticism, the third thing, variety, that I've emphasized. Regional food has an interesting interaction with race in American history, and I just want to discuss that a little bit, because in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the African-American role in creating American regional cuisines was praised and emphasized, albeit in a patronizing fashion, as I'll describe. So for example, James Prosser, who lived from 1782 to 1861, an African-American chef from New Jersey, was among the most celebrated chefs in Philadelphia. And he opened for business in 1810 and perfected the ways of cooking terrapin, which was already a great specialty in Philadelphia. His passing in 1861 was marked by a poem by one of the social elites of the Philadelphia scene entitled Prosser's Journey to Heaven, or The Triumph of Terrapin, replete with pseudo-dialect and narrating Prosser's adventures in the afterlife. Arriving at the banks of the Styx, the chef convinces Sharon to ferry him across by offering stewed oysters, Jersey sausage, and buckwheat cakes. On the far side of the river, however, the Furies stop him and refuse the oysters, but then they're turned to cooperation by means of soft shell crabs fried in butter and plump wheat. At the gates of heaven, St. Peter gives Prosser the hardest test. Even canvasback ducks, another Chesapeake Bay specialty, and lobster salad failed to move St. Peter. It's hopeless until Prosser mentions terrapin. And I'm not going to do the insulting dialect, but basically it's from salt Delaware's reedy margins, from the shores of the Chesapeake, comes our terrapin, good Peter. Suppose of them I needn't speak. What? Stewed terrapin, James Prosser? Open wide, the gates of heaven are born. Here comes terrapin and Prosser. Make him welcome as the next slide. So there's a process of both praise and obscuring of African-American chefs. Here in 1903, we see the cover of the inside cover, frontispiece of the Picayune Creole Cookbook, which is one of the authoritative cookbooks of New Orleans cuisine. And you can't read probably what it says in that brief intro, but basically it says that the secrets of Creole cuisine are held by the former slaves. And now that they're dying out in 1903, it's important to preserve these recipes and their knowledge so that, you know, white women, housewives, will be able to replicate them. The next slide. So in the mid-20th century, however, when it was no longer so easy to romanticize antebellum slave life, Southern cookbooks tended just to leave out African Americans. And I remember when I started at Vanderbilt at the end of the 1970s and in the early 80s, visits to plantations in the Deep South often, you know, they wouldn't mention slaves at all. And I remember being at one where someone actually asked about the slaves, and it was kind of like, you know, going to the Biltmore estate and asking about the lives of the railroad workers that, you know, Vanderbilt employed. I mean, it was kind of like, well, why is that relevant? So here too, we have the Creole Cookbook. It's the like 7th edition, but now the author of the cuisine is not an African-American woman, but a French chef. And in fact, the introduction says that Creole food came to New Orleans via restaurant cooks from France. This is from 1947. The next slide. The way this was somewhat answered was African Americans like Austin Leslie, the chef and owner of a restaurant called Chez Hélène, to identify a category called Creole soul. The question of soul food too is somewhat fraught. The restaurant Sylvia's that featured in my restaurants book in New York describes itself at different times and different contexts as a soul food restaurant, as a down-home restaurant, or as a Southern restaurant. Well, so much for regionalism for the moment. Regionalism has declined because of the second feature that I mentioned, that is processed industrial food. The next slide. The US was not the only country to produce processed food, dried, frozen, packaged ingredients, but Americans adopted these products more enthusiastically and completely than Europeans. This was because of their convenience, their perceived health benefits, and they represented modernity, abundance, and efficiency, all what America was supposed to be about. This is a USIS, that is the United States Information Service, photograph of a typical housewife unpacking groceries in 1958. And notice that almost everything is wrapped up and a large number of items are processed. The American government celebrated the plentiful and inexpensive food available to the average American in its publicity or propaganda, if you like. A key point in propagating the American way of life, and it figured in dramatic Cold War confrontations like the famous kitchen debate between Vice President Nixon and Soviet Premier Khrushchev in 1959. And this was no mean accomplishment. The average American in the 1950s spent under 25% of family income on food, while through most of history, the figure has been more like 70 or 80%. Processed food companies also touted the supposed health benefits of their products. And in retrospect, this doesn't seem as valid as the abundance of those. Wonder Bread is a classic example. Its manufacturer disguising the fact that the method of production leaches out nutrients. And so they retrofitted vitamins and minerals in order to claim Wonder Bread helps build strong bodies 10 ways. And then what the hell? What I remember is 12 ways. Apparently, sometime in the 1950s, they added a couple of things and made it Wonder Bread helps build strong bodies 12 ways. The entire dried breakfast cereal industry was based on health claims combined with convenience. Most of the world never accepted cereals like Cheerios or Fruit Loops, which are right up there with peanut butter, maple syrup as items that are peculiarly North American and that much of the rest of the world doesn't get. In order to make cold cereal taste better and to appeal to children, producers added sugar, claiming that this was nutritious and gave kids added energy. What are now simply called frosted flakes were originally sugar frosted flakes. Corn Pops were sugar pops. Anyone of a certain age will remember the mascot on the TV ads, Sugar Pops Pete, and his little jingle. Forgive my voice, but it's irresistible, right? Oh, the puffs are sweeter and the taste is new. They're shot with sugar through and through. So this was, this was the era many of us grew up in. Excited about convenience, modernity, abundance, healthfulness, but not about taste. Mass market brands require preservatives, texturizers, and other ways of assuring imperishability and standardization. But these adversely affect taste. Artificial flavors and enhancements can't quite make up the difference. The food industry would claim that additives were good for you and that they assured quality and freshness. And this trade-off was accepted by consumers. What we think of now as curated or artisanal or bespoke foods were mistrusted formerly as unhygienic and dubious, so that advertising for food often showed untouched by human hands, food factory workers in lab coats as if they were medical researchers supervising machines. So finally, the third factor, modernity. Variety. Variety is the compensation for the downside of modernity. In other words, rice-a-roni, for example, is an industrial product, but it comes in many flavors. Potato chips are a packaged product, but you can get them barbecued, jalapeno, sour cream onion, and so forth. Options distract from the loss of taste inevitable in processing that allows the bread, vegetables, yogurt, or whatever to be mass produced and to last a long time and to travel long distances. Variety is also observable in a stream of new food products, of things that people had never seen before, but for which recipes were offered by food magazines and the food industry. The next slide, Jell-O. So at one time, Jell-O salads were a standard item. Here is fruit Jell-O, but the little molds surrounding it are vegetable. There were Jell-O salads. And when I moved to the South in 1979, these were still on the menu. They were called congealed salad. And I'd never seen this growing up in New York and going to college and graduate school in California. Jell-O was promoted as modern, convenient, colorful, inexpensive, and yet elegant. Variety is also visible in what were until recently called ethnic restaurants, in the variety of international restaurants. The next slide is of an Indian restaurant in New York from the 1950s. The ethnic restaurant, and I keep using that term because I think following the lead of a food historian named Krishnendu Ray, it conveys the kind of relationship between the patron and the owner. Ethnic foods are marketed to generic Americans. So while many restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Italian restaurants, Jewish restaurants, Indian restaurants opened to serve an immigrant clientele, they were, quote, discovered by the ancestors of today's hipsters or foodies who in the late 19th century were known as bohemians. These are young people with enough money to go out and not a whole lot of social ties and as kind of adventurous spirit where they like to discover a lot of different things. This bohemianism and experimentation and vogue for foreign restaurants goes back to the 1880s and 1890s. Once again, as I indicated with regard to that authentic French tacos sign, this was not true of the rest of the world. If you look at contrast the Guide Michelin for 1965 with the first edition of the New York Times Guide to Dining Out from that same year, this contrast is quite extraordinary. For Paris, the 1965 Guide Michelin lists 375 restaurants. All but 6 of them were French. There were seafood restaurants, Périgord restaurants, Alsatian restaurants. So it wasn't that they had the same menu by any means, but there's absolutely no appetite for foreign cuisine. The New York Times Guide to Dining Out is subdivided among Chinese, Italian, Indian, Japanese, Middle Eastern, Scandinavian, Spanish, etc. And later editions in the 1970s would add Mexican, Thai, and Greek restaurants. A key moment in America's discovery of immigrant cuisines was 1896, when something that was called at the time the chop suey craze began. A high Chinese government official called a viceroy by the press was honored at the Waldorf Hotel in New York. And supposedly his chef prepared a dish whose exotic but accessible and delicious attributes created an instantaneous vogue. And chop suey became wildly popular. In 1905, there were no less than 100 chop suey restaurants outside of Chinatown. Next slide. My students, by the way, many of them have never heard of chop suey. because at some point it was recognized as inauthentic. But here is the sign for the Pekin Noodle Parlor. This is the oldest Chinese restaurant in the United States that is in continuous operation. It's in Butte, Montana. And I don't know how far back this sign goes, probably not to 1911 quite, but obviously it's quite old. And Chinese restaurant is communicated by chop suey and the little quasi pagoda. NPR had a feature on this a couple months ago, and the owner died just a few weeks ago. The second most successful immigrant cuisine was Italian. Again, this became popular beginning in the 1880s, and it also had inauthentic food. Things like eggplant parmesan, marinara sauce, and ricotta cheesecake were invented in the US. Although unlike Chinese food, they're authentically Italian American. That is, Italian Americans would cook things like eggplant parmesan in their homes, whereas Chinese people did not actually make chop suey in their homes. But a Sicilian businessman visiting the United States joked in the 1920s that he had tried some interesting American specialties during his visits, like, for example, spaghetti with meatballs and veal parmesan. And wouldn't it be wonderful if someday someone brought these dishes to Italy? So restaurants have always toyed with authenticity and pseudo-authenticity. On the one hand, they need to offer food that is exotic or unusual. On the other hand, it's got to be acceptable. It has to fit Americans' tastes. The next slide. Here's another Indian restaurant from about the same time. This place was called the Punjab. And so, first of all, they're offering everything, right? You want Italian food? We've got it. You want French food? You want Far Eastern food? I love the little notations about drinks. Foods from the Far East. Punjab says, try a king-sized martini. We all know that it's de rigueur to have martinis with Indian food. You know, it's easy to make fun of this, but this jockeying between authenticity and comfort continues to influence the way ethnic food proprietors present what they're doing. An example of faux authenticity, Xi'an Famous Foods is a little chain in New York that before the pandemic was extremely successful. And in its early years, the owner said that he deliberately employed cashiers who didn't know English, who were from China, but recent immigrants who didn't know English because it made it seem more authentic. I mean, they knew enough English to do the numbers, obviously, but the fact that they did not have English somehow made the message more forceful. This is not a place for tourists, when in fact it was a place for tourists. That's what people want. They want to be able to say, and how many of us have heard this, or alas, in my case, said this. Oh, you know, I was the only non-Chinese person there, or oh, you know, I was the only white person there, or I was the only American-born person at the restaurant. I want to come back to, or not come back to, but at least spend a few minutes on men and women and food, which is, I think, essential for understanding the meanings of American food and the nature of American food. For much of the 20th century, companies sold food to women, the major buyers of food eaten in the house, based on convenience and price. But they also added to this a peculiar theory of marriage. Magazines and other media, and we'll have the next slide, exalted the housewife as the guardian of the family. She was the one who made sure that everyone ate according to scientific ideas about health, marketed by advertisers and home economists. The message here is not just health, but pleasure. That love is both stimulated and reinforced by cooking. I think we all are familiar with the Settlement House cookbook, Settlement Cookbook, rather, whose subtitle was The Way to a Man's Heart. The downside of this picture, deliberately cultivated also by advertisers, is that men's attentions can stray, and that sexual temptation can start with a culinary temptation. A letter to the fictitious Betty Crocker at General Mills in the 1930s said that the female writer usually makes white cake because she doesn't like chocolate cake, but that her neighbor routinely serves fudge cake. Question is this other woman angling to steal the writer's husband? Next slide. On the other hand, the housewife can't be a drudge. She can't be engaged in cooking to the extent that it makes her sort of drab, battered, and unattractive. This is a pamphlet to an oven. You know, it's the directions for an oven made by the Grand Company, appliance company, hence the title, Cooking in the Grand Manner. And this little picture communicates a lot, right? It's not perhaps clear, but the woman is wearing pearls, a low-cut dress, skirt, suit, whatever. She's got an apron on, but she's got her hair up, and she has cooked this wonderful meal, but they're obviously going to go out, right? She's ready to, I don't know, they're going to go to a movie at least, if not something fancier. Her husband is beguiled by the food, just as is the muffin guy in this previous slide. But there's no risk here of the wife being just a kind of glorified servant. So men want hearty meals, and they want an entertaining and svelte companion. In the 1920s, you get a genre of male-oriented foods with titles like 1,000 Ways to Please a Husband, or 333 Ways to a Man's Heart. There's another one that was called Feeding Father, and then my personal favorite from 1925, Feed the Brute. All of these acknowledge the sacrifice that women make in putting their husbands' tastes for strongly flavored but simple food first. You know, there's a whole sense that women like light food, they like salads, they also like desserts. But according to a noted cookbook writer named Eleanor Howe, writing in the 1930s, any woman looking at the word menu needs to know that the primacy is going to go to men and not you. Next slide. A little bit later, this is from the 1960s, 1965. Men and women could be involved in food. This is the front cover to a cookbook by the thriller writer Len Deighton, author of the Ipcris File. And so this retains the association of sexual attraction and food. So here's the front cover. The guy is lifting the spaghetti and being cuddled by his companion. And then the back cover, next slide, the roles are reversed. It's the young woman who is ladling and he is holding her. Now, of course, gender roles have changed, needless to say. Or,
oh my God.
Yeah, oh my God. So to summarize the situation that dominated until the 1970s, fading regional cuisine, name brands, processed foods, variety within brands to divert attention from the bland and slightly chemical taste of the basic product. And I see the 1970s as the turning point in modern American food history. Next slide. While Alice Waters is not single-handedly responsible for the invention of farm-to-table New American cuisine, the founding of Chez Panisse in 1951 is certainly an indication of things to come. And in answer to the question posed at the beginning, yes, I think that farm-to-table has a permanent hold on restaurant and increasingly on what people prefer to cook at home. So, you know, you can see some ironies in this. When 40 years ago, the stereotype that affluent people had of rural people was that they kept chickens in their backyard and, you know, put up their own products from their garden over winter. And now the roles are somewhat reversed. If well-off people don't feel like raising chickens themselves, they pay someone else to raise free-range chickens. And the stereotype of the rural poor is that they're addicted to junk food and fast food. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'll just close with one observation of another important development of the recent past. Next slide. And that is television. Food television has completely changed the market for food. It has taken it beyond its original audience of women, even though cooking shows are among the oldest TV shows, beginning really with Emeril in the late 1990s. Food becomes entertainment, and beginning with Anthony Bourdain, the chefs are no longer in the kitchen. They're no longer showing you how to cook. They're just kind of adventurers, lovable bad boys, something that to some extent has been halted in its tracks by the hashtag #MeToo movement. But food in the media is one of the big stories of the recent past. The big story for the present and the future, of course, is the pandemic. And I think I'll close my talk now because I don't have any particular expertise on the pandemic. I have some opinions I'd be glad to discuss with you and hear from you. But let me just say by way of conclusion that insofar as I've given a kind of critical or even cynical picture of American food, I think its most endearing quality is exuberance. Americans are adventurous, take pleasure in the variety of food, even if they tend to be in a hurry and eat the food, you know, standing up or multitasking. And this high-spirited approach is maybe our saving grace. So thank you all very much. And if there are some questions or comments, I'd be delighted to hear them.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'll take the slides down. Please remember to unmute yourselves if you have a question to ask. And Pam, you want to drive from here?
I just want to thank you for your presentation. It was just really interesting to me. I have a little jingle that popped into my mind when you were talking about the sugar-coated cereal, because that's my generation. Sugar pops are tops.
That's right. Exactly.
Yep.
That's what comes after.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd forgotten.
Yep. My brothers and I, we were scarfing down that sugar-coated cereal.
Frosted Flakes were my favorite.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure.
I believe Alice Waters was originally from Ohio and moved to California. And I was wondering your opinion about the availability of the fabulous produce in California, and also whatever local produce is in different areas of the United States had an influence on, you know, this farm to fork created.
She says in her autobiography, Coming to My Senses, that her mother was a health food nut or a health food enthusiast, that they had all sorts of, good for you, but horrible tasting food when she was growing up. And she was, for her first couple years of college at UC Santa Barbara, which had the reputation of being very much a party school. It was Berkeley more than anything else that changed her attitude towards food via the radical political movement and what at the time was dismissed as hippie culture. But she was very different from the majority of hippies who were also kind of, when it came to sex and music, they were very sensual. But when it came to food, they were, kind of, I remember as someone who went to University of California at Santa Cruz, they were, kind of seaweed and, rather Spartan kind of whole grain food. So the revolutionary thing was actually to take pleasure in food as a gesture against the corporations, against the conformity of bland Americanism that she had grown up with.
Paul, this is Johanna Mendelson. Always great to hear you. I had a question about your and that had to do with the role of chefs today. And you mentioned the bad boys like Anthony Bourdain. But I was wondering, I think chefs have become activists, and it started before the pandemic. And I do think that in your book, as I read it and I was assigning it this semester, that role needs explanation. I'm trying to write about it, but I do think the fact that chefs have gotten involved with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that they want to be part of a bigger international picture, that they want to be out of the kitchen and be part of the social impact is a different direction than we've seen before. So I wondered what you thought about it. Maybe your book draft was finished before that, but it just seemed to me it's a new way that chefs are going.
Yes, yes. So I have a book that I'm working on, actually that I'm finished with. I'm just working on the proofs. That's called Food Matters. And it will come out with Yale University Press. And these are a short series of books on why various things matters. Actually, it's called Why Food Matters. So like why architecture matters. And I address this a little more, but I think this is a very good point.
I'm writing a book about this also. That's why I'm interested in your view.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that Jose Andres, certainly more than anybody else in the United States, has done not just food activism in the sense of taking a stand or, okay, our restaurants are striving for carbon neutrality, but, going to
Michel Nichon, who even preceded him.
Right. There are precedents, but he's the one who's garnered the most attention. Right. And I think with all of these things, you have to consider the star system. So up until recently, it's not that there weren't activist chefs, but that the star system tended to reward charisma and the ratings of other, the 50 best kind of ratings. I think the interesting example, and probably in your book, Joanna, is Rene Redzepi, because Redzepi, first of all, is a celebrity chef, and his restaurant for quite a while ranked #1 in the world. He also held these what were called the Mad Food Symposia in Copenhagen, at which you could see both. You could see the shift from star chef to what shall I call it? The chef as activist or as planetary steward.
Right.
So that you had at these events both a celebration of the gods of food. Remember the infamous Time magazine cover of 2010, in which mentioned only all male chefs, not just the three gods, who were Redzepi, Chang, and Attila, but the archangels, cherubim, seraphim were men as well. But of course, Red Zepi and Attila too, from Brazil, have been extremely active in the global and ecological implications of food. They've been slower to acknowledge not only the role of women, but the history of marginalization or of dismissive attitudes towards women. You can see this event, the Mad Food Symposium, go from macho display. Alex Attila actually wrung the neck of a chicken in one of the two that I attended as the day of the conference. Some of you may have also been there. Yeah, to now, it's all about.
Well, the last one was all about Me Too, so that was.
Exactly. So, I mean, that would seem to be the model of a change of mood. My question is whether you can build a star system on this. It's easier to build a star system on, the chef as a kind of kick-ass celebrity than, I mean, chefs as compassionate. That's certainly, that's going to be different.
Well, I mean, that's what Bottura did with his refectorio. Started that, but for homeless people.
Right, and I've got to admit that he is likable. He was always likable in a way that not many American chefs are. His book was entitled "Never Trust a Skinny Italian Chef."
Right. Well, to be continued on an email conversation, but I appreciate your saying that.
Oh yes, and apropos email, the question about my paper. If you'll, I'll send it to you. It's not published, but I'll send it to you as a Word attachment. My email is.
I have your email, Paul. So I
know. Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
And I'll send you what I just did on. I mean, I think Red Zepi arises from the Nordic food movement, which he doesn't give enough credit to, and what happens as the Nordic food movement becomes the predominant ideology for the whole new Nordic cuisine, and Red Zepi happens to glom onto it, but that's another story for another day.
Sure.
All right, I'll send you what I just did. It's coming out in the Bloomsbury book, but okay, take care.
You too. Thank you for that question.
Anything else?
Okay, so the question had come from Angela Silverman, right? That was about the medieval cookbooks. Yeah, so Angela, if you'll write to me at paul.friedman@yale.edu, I'll certainly send that to you.
Let me interject here that tell everyone that we have a copy of the PowerPoint, so any of the CHOW members who want a copy of that can write to contact a CHOW board member, and we'll make sure you get it. And while I'm on the topic of that, Paul, I'll have an edited version of this to you by midweek, and then the video we'll be able to post the video up.
I have a comment or seeking more information. You mentioned the word pandemic. I went to my local Giant, the Ordinary supermarket, and I noted all of these exotic spices that are new and high-end spices from San Francisco. And I thought, gee, I know that people are cooking more, but are they cooking more specialized foods or intricate recipes? And we talk about early ethnic restaurants as kind of making it different, but yet familiar enough for Americans to enjoy. While with these sorts of spices, it is totally new.
I think
what would you say?
Good point.
Yeah, I think this is part of the general point of certainly Americans are cooking more at home and have rediscovered that. And once the pandemic is over, Will that mean people will realize that, hey, cooking is not so hard, or it's pleasurable, or it's healthier? I know what's going into the food, and that there'll be a kind of renaissance of cooking at home? Or will people be so tired of cooking at home that they swear they'll never do it again? I mean, this also has an impact on the future of restaurants. I think it's clear that a very large number of restaurants have closed, and that more will close. I think that many will open, many new ones, because rents will be much lower in places like DC or New York. But the new restaurants will not necessarily be the same as those of the people who've been adversely affected by present circumstances. Linda, did you have a question? Oh no, that's just my yeah.
I have a question, Marlene.
Marlene.
Could you please address the recent proliferation of the almost finished meals that are sent to your house and then you complete the process?
By almost finished, you mean things like Blue Apron?
Yes.
They seem in a funny way to be the victim of the pandemic, because on the one hand, restaurants obviously do, the ones that have survived, a huge delivery or pickup business. So why mess around? And then on the other hand, people are learning or relearning or readjusting to cooking at home. So, I mean, you could see a scenario where things like Blue Apron would win out on both. You're cooking at home, but it's easier. But since people have, people have more time, they're not commuting, or their house is a mess and their kids are running wild, but they're not, they're not taking trips, they're not going out. So I think the problem that they were experiencing even before the pandemic, brands like Blue Apron, was there's not, the meals have to fit a kind of lowest common denominator. So they're not all that interesting. And they're also kind of on the expensive side. And again, what might seem to be the best of both worlds quickly turns into the worst of both worlds. If I'm going to pay this money, why not go to a restaurant? Or, I can cut the stupid celery myself. So I'm not sure, but I don't think they have as bright a future as seemed to be the case 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Okay, Pam, do you want to have anything to add to?
What, I saw some things pop up in
Bonnie.
the chat. Were they addressed?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
Does anyone else have any questions for Paul?
I have sort of an interesting comment just to throw in here. I was speaking with a cousin who lives in the Bronx this morning, and she said that she went to her local supermarket a few days ago, and she was usually on a day that's not busy at all. It was on Thursday, and she was surprised to see the parking lot jammed and a line out the door to shop, and she didn't understand what in the world was going on. And when she went in there, she found that being the Bronx, it's a very diverse population, a lot of immigrants and so forth, that people were so rattled by the events of last Wednesday in Washington that they were stocking up for a disaster.
That's fascinating.
I thought
have
the
not
most
heard that. And
interesting thing. I said to her, she should write about this, because it's like letter from the Bronx. It was that people had this reaction to the whatever you want to call what happened with the Capitol on Wednesday, and that their reaction, they were buying you know, huge amounts of eggs and paper towel and all the things to prepare. They were going to, because in their experience, when this sort of thing happened, disaster followed, electricity went out and terrible things happened.
Right.
And I thought that was the most interesting thing.
Wow. No, that's very interesting. I've not seen any indication. And
No.
as you can imagine, in my a suburb, which by the way, you can walk to the Bronx from
Right.
there. And nevertheless, it
The
was
ShopRite-
it was
ShopRite's
business
where
as
she was.
usual. I went shopping on Thursday, and there was no line.
Well, if you'd gone to the
mention,
shop, it would be something different again.
Fascinating.
I want to mention something I noticed at my supermarket. People are at various supermarkets in DC. People are lining up and hanging out because they can get the vaccine there. Once the vial is open and people don't show up, if you're there, you can get a vaccine. So that's just another thing that's going on at
Wow. Well, I think we all live in the cliche fast changing world doesn't do justice to it. But it affects food very much. Yeah, so Karen's question. This is an optimistic take, or I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Is it that you're amazed that the students know so much, or that they know so little?
Unfortunately, it's the latter.
Because I teach the history of food sometime. I mean, my major responsibility at Yale is medieval history, but I teach a lecture course on the history of food, sometimes as a seminar too. And I'm amazed at how much students know. Obviously, this is a self-selected group, and they're students at a selective university. But and often, you know, it is the kids who get their parents to adopt a healthier diet, and it is often the kids who drive their parents crazy because they've decided to become vegetarians or vegans. In certain areas, there's a tremendous increase in knowledge among young people, and any increase in knowledge that is perceptible comes, you know, for a demographic that's normally oriented much more to quantity than quality, and that at the same time resists experimentation. Yeah, but you don't have to travel far. I mean, I went to give a talk at West Texas State University, and they had me speak to high school students as well. And the range was incredible. Students who were incredibly sophisticated, much of it from TV, and you know, students who basically ate the same thing every day. Let's see, there was another question that I saw only part of. Oh, adventurousness, and less so for breakfast and dessert. Yeah, so breakfast is an interesting thing because breakfast people really like predictability. And I had the personal experience of this. In my junior year, as I said, I went to UC Santa Cruz, which was very much a hippie college at the time. We didn't have any grades or anything. And they gave me credit for teaching English in Indonesia for 6 months, taught English as a second language to students in Surabaya, Java. And I lived with a family, and the food actually wasn't very good generally. I never quite figured out if this family just, you know, they weren't interested in it. They were well enough off, or that I just didn't like the food. That, you know, when I came back, I vowed that I'd never eat rice again. A vow that I've broken, but I certainly had a lifetime supply. There wasn't a whole lot of interest. I didn't mind. I mean, I was having a great time, and there was a lot to divert me. But I was most homesick and sort of food homesick at breakfast. Somehow leftover little shrimp and tempeh, you know, like tofu and rice, really disappointed me. So there is, I think, a kind of, you know, the way in which food, the word comfort is not inappropriate, not for all food, but that certain food is a comfort and is a reminder of the good aspects of embodiment, you know, being a human being with a circulatory system and a stomach, that breakfast is the meal in which that seems to be the most active.
Anything else?
Well, if everybody has had a chance to comment and get their questions answered, thank you so much for spending so much of your afternoon with us, Paul, which is very enjoyable, giving us lots to think about. Thank you for sharing your considerable expertise.
I think there are a couple of other questions up there that I see.
Okay.
And
If I got to them, I'm sorry.
okay, whatever, but
There was one about scholarship on the history of food.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah, from Annie, the historiography of food history. Well, food history was always an amateur topic. That is to say, there were people who were enthusiasts and who wrote wonderful studies of it. But the interest of professional or academic historians, think of the Oxford Food Symposium when it was first created in 1980, right? That was not an academic enterprise so much as that of, scholarly, but not necessarily university employed people. And, pioneers like Barbara Ketchum-Wheaton did incredible work on this. The first people to study food as an academically serious topic in the United States tended to be anthropologists. And what happened in history in the 1970s when I was in graduate school was that anthropology became the most influential methodology on history because it fit with the agenda of historians both to understand ordinary people instead of concentrating on battles and elites and politics, high power politics, and because the anthropologists' approaches showed you what everyday life was like, or what later became called in historical circles material culture. And so that includes what people eat, how they orient themselves around the world, what distinguishes them from other tribes, let's say, has to do with food. So the anthropologist Sidney Mintz, who taught at Hopkins, whose book Sweetness and Power about sugar is still one of the most influential books on food history. And it influenced me very much because, like my book on spices, it shows that something that is not a biological necessity, you actually do not need sugar to live any more than you need nutmeg, but that the desire or coffee, coffee is debatable, but let's say tea, the desire for these products, had cataclysmic consequences historically. The discovery of the New World, the colonization of much of the rest of the world by Europeans, the virtual extermination of the native inhabitants of the New World, the importation of slaves to cultivate sugar. This is, what I see as the central importance of the non-arguable importance of food history. And this has become slowly, but certainly increasingly clear. Well, thank you all very much. This has been a great pleasure for me, and I really appreciate your questions and your comments.
Thank you. It's been terrific.
Thank you very much.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, and we will move on to, if anybody brought a what's it? Paul, a what's it is a culinary related object that the person knows what its function is, but is probably something that maybe a lot of other of us are unaware of. So that's something we often share at a meeting. So if you want to hang around and see if anybody brought a what's it to this meeting, if not, best of luck with your new book.
Oh,
And
no, I
looking forward to it.
certainly want to see this.
Sometimes people have one, sometimes they don't. So if anyone has a what's it, let us know.
I don't
Either-
actually have a what's it, but
Okay,
I have something I found at a resale shop, and it's someone's recipe file. And what's really interesting to me is that it's labeled on here ABC. So whoever this was, this is just one section of the alphabet, and it's absolutely stuffed with recipes. And one of these days, I'm going to take it all out and make sure I keep it in order and see what it is. But it's very interesting to me. There's a lot of her handwritten stuff and clippings from magazines. And there's even something in here about breadfruit. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun one weekend to just go through.
Thanks.
thank you for sharing that. It looks interesting. The box is pretty too.
Yeah.
Can I respond to Claudia?
Yeah.
Well, this last holiday, my husband's niece, who's my age, and likes to cook, she said, "Why don't we exchange 18 recipes each?" I said, "Sounds like fun." So I went into my stash of recipes that belonged to my mother, John's mother, me and John, and pulled out 18 recipes. She did the same thing. They could hardly be more different. And this relates to our speaker today because she uses industrial food. So most of her recipes are full of Bisquick and powdered garlic and I don't know, lots of sugar and box cakes, and none of mine had any of that in it. It was all fresh food. It's all cooked from scratch. And so I looked at her recipe, scratching my head as she was putting instant noodles into broccoli salad, instant raw noodles into broccoli salad to make it crunchy, and wondering what she made of my collection
today. I thought you
and what I made of hers and whether I could cook anything out of her cookbook.
heard from Stephanie. Bye.
Anyway, that's a remark, and it has to do with the industrial food. And then in my family, we always ate everything we made from scratch and fresh. But so this is a cultural, I'm an anthropologist. This is a cultural difference that just fascinated me, that it's still there and it's so intense in these two collections of 18 recipes. That's my remark.
That is interesting.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that?
Yeah.
Number of my students say that when we talk about this kind of processed food, or we've read like Laura Shapiro's Something from the Oven about women and food in the 1950s, that at home, everything is fresh, or, at least their parents maybe not cook all the time at home, but when they do, they don't use things like Bisquick or Hamburger Helper, but that their grandmother, that their parents have to tell them to shut up when they go to their grandmother's house, because it's going to be like 3-bean salad with canned kidney beans, or weird things like what you described with the raw noodles. So that it's the grandparents' generation, people my age and yours, that are divided. Of course, the other division is sort of where people live, and to some extent their sort of cultural orientation. But what was funny is that, of course, when I was growing up, it was your grandmother who's the custodian of, my grandmother,
Right.
my father's side, still had a vegetable garden and made her own horseradish and, as many of her own things as possible. And my parents certainly couldn't be bothered with anything like that.
Can I comment on that? I almost said this before when you were talking about the processed food revolution of the 1950s, because I'm a child of the 1950s. And my mother, who was the daughter of Southern Italian immigrants, and was not a particularly progressive or educated woman, but she was a disciple of Dr. Carlton J. Fredericks. And I don't know if that name means anything to anybody. She listened to him on the radio all through the 50s and maybe the 60s. This is in Westchester County, New York. And as a result, she raised me on whole wheat products. And I never had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, although all the other kids I went to school with did. And I never had those sugary cereals. And I just wondered if anybody else had any familiarity with this experience. Well, she was just such an outlier. I have no idea.
No,
she was not a radical in any other way.
my mother was also, my mother was French. She brought French cooking, and she had attitudes which I've always thought very funny, because numerous American foods were barbaric.
Yeah.
So finally, when I was 15 or so, I asked her, what is a barbaric food? She said, iced tea. I said, iced tea. Okay, well, because it wasn't hot, and you put ice in, and ice is American, and it's just not reasonable. And corn was, maize in the British term, corn in our term, was a barbaric food, because that is what you feed to animals. And when I went to France, when I was probably around 17, 18, I found bananas wrapped in silver foil with a little label attached explaining how to eat it. So, you never know how narrow a cuisine can be. And I remember laughing uproariously about this banana, but they were rare in France in the 1960s, which we can hardly believe today, but they were. And I am terrifically delighted by your first slide. Because of course, all my cousins in France are eager to attack American cooking. Although recently they've been writing to me for recipes for gingerbread.
There you are.
Gingerbread. Well, that's a common German French food. It's called pain d'épices in French.
But you see, the panini and this does not come from Italy. The sushi does not come from Japan. All of these were re-exported by America.
Yeah, right.
The United States is like Memphis used to be for FedEx. All the packages came there by plane and then went out in different directions. It's like the central decider of what's going to be global cuisine, at least up until now.
I had a girlfriend in Colorado Springs who always used boxes of instant potatoes. I don't know how anybody could eat that, but okay. And one day she decided to teach her two sons how you make potatoes from scratch. So she brought them in the kitchen and she showed them how you peel them and you cut them and you boil them. And their response to her was, those aren't real potatoes. They didn't come out of the box.
Exactly.
That was in the 60s.
Yeah. See, that's the advantage of people with long memories is, you've had food experiences that, you have to, they're hard to believe. And particularly that often at the time, it was just whatever. I assure you, students are amazed at the sort of just free associations of, and as I said, I grew up in a family that had, pretty reasonable food. On the other hand, we did have cold cereal of all times, of all kinds, if that's what we wanted.
when, in response to the banana, which I found interesting, my father came from Latvia when he was 12, and he'd never seen a banana. So he tried to eat it with the peel on.
Skin on, yeah.
And I had talked to Russians when we were on a cruise to Russia many years ago, and they'd never seen a pineapple because I gave them one thinking, you know, it would be a delicious treat for them, but they didn't even know what you did with it.
Looking for a what's it?
Yes, we have a what's it
Goody.
from, okay.
Looks like a weapon.
So can you tell what this is? I'll show you. It goes up like this and down like this.
Turn it.
Does it slice something?
This is what moves down right here. This moves all the way down.
Some kind of serious nutcracker?
Bingo. It is for cracking black walnuts.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Everybody I know cracks them by running a car over them.
That doesn't work, apparently.
Well, it does in Kentucky.
Well, I have my nutcracker, so that I don't need a car to do it.
No, it's
That's impressive.
For a meat tenderizer.
And I saw,
The black walnut cracker, have you used it?
Oh, yes, of course.
I harvested black walnuts some years ago, and it drove me crazy trying to get at them. I was going at them with a hammer on brick steps.
Well, I bought the
shell flies all over, and so does the contents.
well, I bought this nutcracker from a black walnut company in Arkansas.
Between a black walnut and a brown walnut.
Oh, completely different.
Do they sell them in the supermarkets? The black
walnuts? Yes.
usually.
They're lucky.
In some supermarkets, yes, I can get them in mine.
Yeah.
I've seen
Black
them at
walnut is an
Costco.
American tree. And it is belongs to the walnut family, but it's an American tree. And it has the effect of killing everything that grows underneath it. It's very strong. And the other walnut is a European walnut. And
They
it's
say
much
English
milder.
walnut, a lot of people.
Yeah,
The
they
easy
call it
one.
English, but it's found all over the Middle East. And, you know, it's a completely different. And the black walnuts have a very strong flavor. You have to like it. But I can buy it every week at the farm market down the road from me.
I have an immense black walnut tree in my backyard, and it produces and produces, but they go to waste. But the squirrels love them, and they know how to get at the good part. But I may invest in one of these. Who knows? Thank you.
now you know that they make one specifically for it. I saw somebody else had what's it?
What is IACP?
International Association of Culinary Professionals.
They were before me. It looked like they had one.
No, that's what was just shown. That was the walnut, black walnut cracker.
I have one. I'm not part of your group though. I don't know if I can show something.
Yes.
We're happy to see. We like this. This is fun.
I'm here from, well, I shouldn't tell you where I'm from or you'll know what this is. So I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if I
and
can
hold it like in front of your face is probably the best camera angle.
Okay, so here's the bottom of it, and then it goes like this. So
Is it a little shovel?
Crumpet turner for the fire?
No.
Is it a little shovel or is it flat?
It's flat. So
Flat,
I can this thin, so I'll show that in front of my face, and then this is how my light in here is not very good. I should turn on that other light. And then it's got this stick, and it's held like this.
Where are you from? Maybe that'll be a
Tell
hint.
you where I'm from. I'm from Italy.
Is it a chestnut roaster?
No, no. Italy, Italy. There's your big clue.
The way you're holding it, it looks like you dip it.
Is it a pizza cutter?
Is it related to gnocchi?
It can be. How is it related to gnocchi? Hi, Peter.
Hi.
So you can, should I go ahead and go do this?
Yes.
You can lay out your tube of gnocchi and then cut them. You can also make cavatelli. You can make your orecchietti this way, cavatelli or that way, gnocchi or this way.
Huh.
So it's really handy. It does wonders.
Why does it have such a long handle?
I don't know. Often this one is different because often the handle is down here and rounded, and so you hold it like this and pull or push or cut.
This is great, Karima. This is like the Vegematic of the pasta world.
I know.
How old is it?
These date back quite a bit. I don't know how old mine in particular is, but I bought it at an antique shop. Yeah.
Right. Could you buy a new one, or is it replaced by pasta machine?
They've people are more doing it by hand or with knives or yeah. They really, and I'm surprised that they're not used anymore because they make the job so easy of cavatelli and other things. And there isn't a replacement for it except for a knife.
Iron?
Pardon me?
Iron? Is it made of iron?
Mhm.
It looks like it's well balanced because of the stick and the ball on the end, which might take the variation out of the person's hand from the motion because it's
Yeah.
so well balanced.
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe people don't know about it anymore.
People are making less and less pasta by hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
As with
Karima, do you know if there's any YouTube videos about how to make the different pasta shapes with that tool?
Oh, with this tool, not that I know of.
Maybe you could
one.
give us a video demonstration on social media.
I have one thing that I did on, I have an Instagram account, which is Historical Italian Food. And I did one thing with this, and I have this in the picture with a little thing next to it, which is like a stracciati.
Enough.
Little gray things. And so I do have one demonstration of myself using it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
I stumped the historians. This is great.
Well, we are stumpable.
It was also nice sharing this with one of my prize pieces. So
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Well, come again.
Yes, please do.
Or join.
well, how can I do it? Because I live in Italy and I'd love to join if you are doing everything online though.
Yes.
Yes, everything is online.
Everything is online. Okay.
Yes, and we're building slowly a video archive of these presentations, so we can send you a link to that
Okay.
as a return email with your dues. Our treasurer will be happy to tell you.
Okay, so I look you up on
CHow-DC.
It's capital CH, little o, big W, DC, capital, dot, is it org or com?
.org.
Org.
.org. And you can join via PayPal online.
Okay, I can join by PayPal. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, that's the easiest thing.
It's
And-
not very much to join.
Write it out in full. Culinary Historians of Washington, and that will take you to the website.
Oh, okay. Oh, of Washington, okay, instead of, okay.
Yeah,
Great.
that's Chow.
CHow-DC.
So glad you found us.
Yeah, I was invited, hold on. I was invited by Sheila Cry.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila, for extending the invitation.
That's great.
All right. Well, we've had a really interesting meeting. Wonderful whatsits. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your expertise and your opinions. This is very
recording of this. I came late, but how can I see the recording of this session with Paul?
Pat
Well,
has that info.
I'll download it and edit as in the interest of brevity. Usually it's the introductory remarks that Judy makes, and then the balance of the relevant conversation. I think this one, the Q&A at the end, has been so fascinating that I'll just put pretty much the full recording. We have a YouTube channel where these are archived, but I will send the link to the membership mailing list.
Can the people who showed the whatsits take a picture of them and email them to me for Chow Line?
Yes, yes. Who's speaking?
CC Williamson.
I put my email in the chat.
Okay, so I see www. Let's see. Your email.
No, that's
okay. Williamson. Okay.
I'll put it in there again.
All right. Let me know. I can. Let's see. I just lost it. Okay. CC. Or
I'll say while that's happening that one of the things that's preserved in this Zoom meeting is a text file of all the chat comments. I have not been archiving them because they didn't seem relevant, but this conversation I think is fascinating enough that I'll preserve that as well.
I also want to make sure that Paul knows that he gets 1 year of free membership in Chow as a result of having made this presentation to us. So Paul, you're one of us for the next year for sure.
May have slipped up to catch up with football scores or something.
Oh, sure, understood.
May have gone.
Let's go.
Go Ravens. My family is a Ravens fan, so if I don't say go Ravens, I will no longer be a family member. But I didn't wear purple today, so don't tell my family.
Well, they're leading 20-13 at the moment.
Okay.
What are the Redskins doing? Didn't they play too?
They lost.
They lost.
Angela meeting.
Okay. Any announcements? Does anybody have any announcements to share with everybody?
Angela Silverman, I answered your question.
Okay.
Thanks, Kareem. I got it.
Okay, great.
Any general announcements before we adjourn? Next meeting is February 14th, Valentine's Day. Are we all going to wear red?
No.
No? Okay. Just asking.
Who's the speaker?
Speaker is the topic is dubious gastronomy, eating Asian in the USA. Robert Ji Song Q. Am I saying that correctly, Judith?
Yes.
Okay. And that
he's on the faculty, I think, at Binghamton.
Okay.
That should be very interesting.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Oh, yeah.
So we will be adjourned, and thank you all for your participation. And I think this was a very interesting meeting, something to take our mind off what was happening in the city this week. And thank you, and see you next month.
Everybody stay safe.
Stay safe.
Okay.
Well.
Thank you all. I'll close now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice meeting y'all.